A smart and handsome young man unexpectedly travels through Hokkaido and meets a calm and intelligent black long straight detective girl. In this world where the Japanese police are known as the salaried barrel group, they work together to cleverly deduce and solve countless mystery problems. Of course, this is impossible. What is actually being said here is the story of a young boy who was struck by lightning and crossed Hokkaido. By chance, he unexpectedly met a foolish detective girl who was known as Dongyu Town Intellectual Responsibility and future famous detective and criminal officer, and then with a kind face, he squeezed this silly girl out of oil. Keywords of the novel. I am not a detective without pop-ups. I am not a detective. Download the complete collection of TXT, I am not a detective. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Classmate, do you know deductive reasoning? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Classmate, do you know deductive reasoning? In early April, it was placed in other parts of Japan, which was a good time to appreciate cherry blossoms. However, in Hirano, central Hokkaido, the sakura frontline is still far away, and the cherry blossom trees are still bare without half a bud. College freshmen cannot start a new stage of life in the rain of cherry blossoms. This is somewhat regrettable, after all, it is a classic scene in the manga. But now, Qin Kiss doesn't care about these ups and downs, and is standing in a corner of the school courtyard carefully scrutinizing every passing new student. Just find another person. As long as she finds another person, she can start a long-planned club recruitment activity, showcasing the charm of deductive reasoning to everyone, making them deeply trapped and unable to extricate themselves. In the end, she obediently falls under her school uniform sailor skirt, kisses her round-toed leather shoes devoutly, and becomes a member of the Deductive Reasoning Precision Research Society. And she, Miss Qin Kiss, will become the first minister of the Interpretation and Reasoning Precision Research Society at the private Yueing University in Hirano, leaving a lasting legacy. Even 10 or 20 years later, younger generations will still mention her name with admiration on their faces. We are only one person away from achieving our goal now. She anxiously searched, almost unable to resist holding her fists and praying to the gods. Finally, she saw a freshman leisurely carrying a backpack through the courtyard and walking towards the school gate. This boy is about 1.75 meters tall, which is considered relatively tall among freshmen, but his physique is thin and he doesn't look strong. His face is gentle and can be considered a little white face. Most boys like him wouldn't join stinky clubs like baseball or kendo. Even if he was a member of a sports club during junior high school, he wouldn't have been a regular first choice. Maybe after 3 years of playing basketball and sitting on the bench for 3 years, he has long been disheartened and completely disappointed in sports. It's him. Qin Kiss had no more options, and the last person could not be found. The activity could not be launched for a long time, and the guys who had been invited before were probably impatient and clamoring to leave. Even if the new student in front of her was a strong man, she had to find a way to get back and recharge, let alone look very suitable to be her subordinate. Without hesitation, she rushed over and grabbed the boy with her hand. Her delicate little face showed a sweet smile and she said, "This student, do you know deductive reasoning?" Qi Yuanwu didn't expect to be grabbed by a girl while walking well. He turned his head strangely and saw that he was also a freshman in the first grade. He wore a red ribbon around his white shirt collar and a light yellow thin sweater over it. Below was a black pleated sailor skirt that hung down below his knees, white bubble socks, and brown-black round-toed small leather shoes. The female uniforms of private Yueing universities come standard, which are quite attractive, simple yet not simple, and very in line with his aesthetic. This girl is also beautiful, with shawled hair, willow eyebrows, pink lips, apricot eyes, clean and neat teeth, black as paint eyes, and a melon seed face that looks delicate and charming. What attracts the most attention is her skin, which is as warm and fair as jade, making people feel like reaching out to try the smoothness. As the saying goes, a white veil conceals 100 ugliness. Moreover, This young girl is not ugly at all, naturally appearing particularly beautiful. However, her figure is not very good, and she is still in a state where a small lotus only shows its sharp corners, slightly flat, but only in her freshman year, with a promising future and not a flaw. Even from the perspective of Kaiwanwu's 2 lifetimes of being a person, he can give this JK a score of 90. However, he knows a lot of people and doesn't really care about what others look like. Moreover, based on his experience, a beautiful girl inexplicably grabs you, either preparing to pull you into a trap or treating you as a laborer. 99 out of 9 is not a good thing. However, he didn't forcefully shake it off either. He didn't like to have physical conflicts with others, so he casually replied, "I know. Classmate, it's okay if you don't know. Let me give you a brief introduction. Deductive reasoning is an organic combination of facts and logic. It is a science that arranges many facts into an uninterrupted chain of events, and finally draws the correct conclusion." Qin Lioli asked, but it was just a provocation. Unexpectedly, the boy in front of him really knew. It took him half a while to react and exclaim in surprise, "Do you know deductive reasoning?" Qi nodded and said, "Yes, I said I know, and just now you also quoted Holmes' definition of deductive reasoning in the novel. Is there any problem?" No, no problem." Qin Lioli instinctively answered, and then felt great joy in her heart. Her gaze at Qi changed. The deductive reasoning method was officially introduced to Japan in the late 1980s, or rather, it began to attract some attention in the field of detective fiction, guiding the style of novels to shift from the social school to the authentic school. However, it is only 1991 now, and most high school students may not even have heard of the term deductive reasoning method. The boy in front of him can accurately point out that Sherlock Holmes's related works have defined deductive reasoning method. This is obviously from the same path. Perhaps this guy can become a key member of the new club, and even a candidate for cadres. She immediately lifted her spirits and bowed seriously, saying, "Since my classmates are also good friends, please make sure to join me. No, join our deductive reasoning research club. Please." She had made up her mind that even if the boy refused, she would still try to persuade him to become her subordinate. However, to her surprise, Kaiwanwu did not refuse. Instead, her eyes lit up and she asked with interest, "What are the benefits of joining your club?" Qin Lioli was stunned and asked, "What benefits?" "What benefits?" "Shared aspirations, studying deductive reasoning together, improving logical thinking ability together, and enjoying the pleasure of solving puzzles together are the greatest benefits. What other benefits are needed? I haven't seen anyone ask such a question about recruiting new members for junior high school clubs." Qi twisted his index and middle fingers with his thumb, smiled at the corners of his mouth, as if selling prohibited drugs to her. He whispered, "The recruitment season hasn't started yet, so you're running here to recruit people. Are you afraid you won't be able to grab the new club? So if I join, I'll be able to help you. You deserve to repay me. It's reasonable to allocate a portion of the funds you applied for from the student union to me, isn't it? What kind of nonsense is this?" Qin Lioli was stunned and didn't expect this boy to want money. She couldn't believe it and said, "The club funds are used to organize club activities. How can they be allocated to individuals for personal use? Isn't that corruption?" Qi interest dissipated and he turned his head and left. "Then you can find someone else. Fool, who can do things for you when you don't have money these days?" Seeing that there was no one left to catch Lioli, how could he possibly let him go? Quickly stopped him and persuaded, "This classmate, since you also enjoy reasoning." "I'm not interested in reasoning," Kaiwanwu interrupted her directly. "But you know deductive reasoning well, why do you want to learn if you're not interested?" Qi bypassed her and said nonchalantly, "Knowing and liking are two different things. I also know what carrots are, but I don't like them." Qin Lioli still refused to let him go and followed behind, earnestly persuading, "Even if you don't like to study it, it's okay. Maybe you will become a criminal police officer in the future. By then, you will be proficient in deductive reasoning and can easily find criminals. Maybe you can become a criminal police officer and be envied by others. Isn't that good? Qian still refused to submit. If he didn't have the money, don't think he would spend time. He continued to follow his path and said calmly, it's useless to study. In the future, there will be surveillance cameras everywhere, and you can tell who the culprit is at a glance. There's no need to reason. DNA is enough evidence, and it's useless to infer the culprit without DNA. Therefore, reasoning will soon lose most of its practicality and become a simple intellectual game, so I'm not interested. For future considerations, I advise you not to spend too much time on it. Qin Liuli frowned and finally found the problem. It turned out that this kid is a heretic of the technology faction. She is not afraid of the tech camp. She has already argued several times and excitedly said, how could you say that? Classmate, you probably don't know. Although surveillance was invented at the end of the 19th century, it has always had significant flaws and storage is too inconvenient. Not to mention videotapes, just talking about hard drives, now a 100 MB hard drive costs around 30,000 yen, and spending so much money can't save 10 minutes of video. How can it be popularized among the public? The cost cannot be accepted by the police department. How could it be everywhere? After taking a breath, she continued to point out the absurdity in Qiyuan Wuhua. As for the DNA test you mentioned, I'm afraid you've only seen this term in a magazine, haven't you? That technology is also too expensive and lacks practicality. It costs thousands of dollars to conduct a test, which the Metropolitan Police Department and local police headquarters cannot afford. Currently, only Tokyo can do it, and it is impossible to require the police to send all cases to Tokyo for processing. Therefore, reasoning is very useful and an important tool for maintaining public security and ensuring national safety. How can we not attach importance to it, and how can we not spend time researching it? Qin Liuli became more and more proud as she spoke, feeling that her words were well-founded and indisputable, successfully maintaining the dignity of the reasoning faction. The boy in front of him should have simply knelt down and surrendered, and from then on, he lost his way and became the leader of the reasoning faction. But the situation once again surprised her, and Qian Wuxi remained unmoved. She said nonchalantly, it will be cheaper in the future. Everyone can afford surveillance, and the government will install it everywhere, which is annoying. DNA testing only costs a few dollars each time, and the police don't care about this small amount of money. They wish they could expose all the land at the crime scene and send it for testing. This was really a pipe dream, and Qin Liuli immediately shouted, that's impossible. Even if it's really like what you said, it should be 100 years from now. Reasoning is still very important now. Qian was too lazy to argue with her again, shrugged and said, whatever you think, I won't join your hopeless club anyway. You. Qin Liuli didn't expect this guy to have a stone head. He dared to be so stubborn and was finally angered. He squinted his eyes slightly and was about to give him a few more harsh words. At that moment, a chubby girl ran over and shouted from a distance, Liuli, haven't you found the last one yet? Those guys don't want to wait anymore, everyone is clamoring to leave, and Yongtaro can't stop him anymore. Qin Liuli hurriedly said, I have found it. I am persuading him to participate in the activity and give me some more time. The chubby girl ran closer and her gaze turned around on Qian Wu. Suddenly, she grabbed the person and showed a simple and amiable smile on her face. Classmate, don't hesitate anymore. Our Liuli has designed a game for a long time, which is very fun. You will definitely love it very much. Let's go quickly. As she spoke, she winked at her friend. Upon seeing Liuli, she immediately realized that there was only one person left. Regardless of whether this kid liked it or was heretic, it was better to take him back and pretend to be a human head. There was no need to talk to him anymore. She immediately reached out and grabbed Qian Wu, her strange power unleashed, and as she dragged him, she changed her direction and said, "That's right, this student. Language is like the wind, and he is too weak. Come and participate in our activity, and you will definitely change your mind." Coincidentally, let this tech heretic experience the charm of the detective school. As long as this kid participates in the activity, he will definitely be impressed by the charm of reasoning and return to the right path. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. This is murder, and the killer is right between us. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. This is murder, and the killer is right between us. Life is like chocolate, you never know what the next one tastes like. Forrest Gump. Kaiwanwu now has some experience of Forrest Gump's feelings. Unexpectedly, on the first day of school, he was kidnapped by two girls, which is simply inexplicable. Fortunately, he had a carefree personality. Since he couldn't escape. At school, when a boy was caught by a girl, it was difficult for him to run, so he struggled in vain and obediently was taken to an empty science laboratory. Where 7 unlucky people, 5 men and 2 women, were already waiting impatiently. They either looked frustrated or complained softly. After Qin Liuli entered the door, she perfunctorily said, 7 yuan classmates, both sides have already introduced each other on the way, I'm sorry, I'll delay you for a while. Then she forcefully pressed him down and climbed onto the podium, looked around, bowed deeply, and loudly said, classmates, please be quiet. I'm very sorry for keeping everyone waiting for so long, but I believe that after the event ends, everyone will think that time has not been wasted. She was full of confidence, her voice was loud, her aura was extremely strong, and the indoor commotion dissipated in an instant. Qin Liuli smiled with satisfaction and bowed lightly again. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Qin Liuli from Class E for 1 year. The reason why I invited everyone here is also very clear to everyone, which is to establish a brand new club. The Interpretation and Reasoning Precision Research Society. I have had this idea for a long time. I first came into contact with reasoning when I was in 3rd grade of elementary school. Since then, I have been deeply attracted to detective novels. However, as I grew older, I gradually discovered a problem. Many detective novels are somewhat presumptuous, and even take the wrong path. They are used to express the darkness of human nature, reflect social problems, and reason for the sake of reasoning, seriously lacking logic. At that time, I thought that if one day I had the opportunity, I would definitely form a like-minded organization that truly loves reasoning and has rigorous logic. Now, I think it's time to join forces with everyone and promote Japan's development in the field of deductive reasoning. She had clearly prepared for a long time, writing her speech passionately and memorizing it fluently. Overall, it was very infectious, but there may not be many people in this room who really enjoy reasoning. Most people have not even heard the name, deductive reasoning, and gradually some people became impatient. The atmosphere began to deteriorate again, and at that moment, a chubby boy stood up coldly, his eyes wide open, and he wanted to speak, but he pinched his neck and made a sound, but couldn't say anything. After stumbling for a few steps, he turned to face the crowd, slowly bleeding from the corners of his mouth, collapsed to the ground, twitched a few times, kicked his leg, and stopped moving. The room fell silent for an instant, and the captured, reserve members, looked at the boy who fell to the ground and couldn't stand up in shock. Their thinking froze for a moment and they lost their language ability. What is this situation, a sudden illness? Don't panic, everyone. Qin saw that Liuli's face was calm and composed. He first calmed everyone's emotions, then quickly stepped forward and placed his hand on the boy's carotid artery to try it out. He rolled his eyelids and looked up with a heavy expression, whispering, "He's dead." The cause of death was acute poisoning. Then she looked around the room with a sharp gaze and said, "This is murder, the killer is right between us." In the science laboratory, the desks were pieced together into a long table, with 8 students including Kaiwanwu sitting on either side. The corpse lying in front of them was secretly taking out the sign, "I am a corpse," and the autopsy report, and placing it on their chest. Qin Liuli was distributing handwritten brochures, and Bai Jing's face turned red with excitement. She suppressed her excitement and said, "Jin Tian was brutally killed. As companions and friends, we have a responsibility and obligation to uphold justice for him and find the murderer." This is probably the recruitment activity she organized for the club. The students who were abducted became interested and took over the handwritten brochures to start flipping through. Qi Yuanwu also received a copy and casually flipped through it, discovering that the activity was somewhat similar to script killing. The booklet contained the itinerary of the character he played today, what he saw and heard, his relationship with the deceased, his belongings, and so on. It is estimated that the next step is for a group of people to inquire and discuss with each other, solve various mysteries, and deduce the motives, methods, and hidden secrets behind the killer killing the deceased. Overall, it's a bit interesting, but he doesn't have time to play with this kind of thing. If it only takes 10 or 20 minutes, he doesn't mind giving some lady face. Sitting here is considered a small favor, but looking at the situation on site, it won't take an hour or two to finish. He stood up and said, "Qinjian classmate, I have already understood the activity and it's very interesting, but if there's nothing else, can I go back first?" Qin Liuli was introducing the game rules to others when he heard the words and turned back, saying, "No, student Qiyuan. This is a murder case, and no one can leave until the murderer is found. The number of people is just right. If Kaiwanwa leaves the event, she will be in trouble and cannot accept it. But I already have other plans this afternoon, so I can't afford to waste too much time. Please, wait a little longer." Qin Liuli had a very good idea and insisted on continuing the activity no matter what. After a perfunctory sentence, she quickly went to answer other people's questions. Qi Yuanwu shook his head. He had already made an appointment with the person at the garbage bin and couldn't wait that long. He asked directly, "So, we must find the culprit before we can leave?" "That's right." For this event, Qin Liuli prepared for a whole spring break, spending more than 10 days racking her brains and setting countless logical traps. Each person only holds a part of the truth and a part of the seemingly true truth. It is not an easy task to piece together all the clues and find the murderer. As long as these people start searching for the murderer and immerse themselves in the game, they will definitely be impressed by the charm of deductive reasoning and will eventually join her team, becoming an official member of the Deductive Reasoning Research Society. By then, the first shot of her wonderful college life would have been completely fired. She thought very beautifully, but Qiyuanwu didn't care. She casually placed the handwritten booklet aside and asked, "Can I start first?" The first stage of this game is to ask questions and exchange information with each other. Anyone can start, and Qin Liuli doesn't mind saying, "Okay, let's start asking questions from Qiyuan. Feel free to ask any way you want." Each person has 3 minutes to ask questions freely, but others have the right to choose to answer, not answer, or lie based on their own identity. Qi Yuanwu nodded to show understanding, then turned to the suspects and smiled, "Everyone, please stand up. The students have good discipline and are quite cooperative." Even if confused, they stand up in pairs and look at him inexplicably. Qin Liuli was not sure what he wanted to do, but it didn't violate the game rules, and she didn't stop it either. It didn't matter, it was only a waste of 3 minutes at most. Qi Yuanwu smiled and raised his hands, "Please close your eyes, come. Everyone raise your hands above your heads. Yes, that's it, start taking deep breaths. Inhale, exhale, take a deep breath, slowly exhale, and relax your body. Imagine being in a quiet forest, with the fragrance of trees, the pleasant chirping of birds, and the flowing water of clear springs sliding over the rocks." Qi Yuanwu's voice is very magnetic, guiding everyone's breathing like guiding meditation. The sense of command is very strong, and Qin Liuli couldn't help but start adjusting his breathing rate according to his instructions, but he still felt something was wrong in his heart. What is this doing, and what is it related to finding the killer? Is this a yoga class? But this guy's voice is so magnetic, it sounds quite comfortable. She was hesitating whether or not to speak up and stopped when she heard 7 Wu say, "Okay, everyone did a good job. That's it, keep your body relaxed, relax. Okay, okay. Now the killer can put down his hand." Qin saw that Liuli's arms instinctively wanted to droop, but her brain instantly realized that she was not the culprit, and in the end, her arms trembled slightly. Most of the people present reacted the same way as her, with her arms drooping slightly and her movements returning to normal. Only a boy wearing glasses lowered his arm almost half before lifting it up again, with a slightly awkward expression. Chiyuan Wuchong's glasses man smiled apologetically and pointed at him before saying to Qin Liuli, "Qin classmate, he killed people. Can I leave now?" End of this chapter. Chapter 3. I am a professional spiritual medium. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. I am a professional spiritual medium, a bastard who should go to hell and be burned by the flames for 1,000 years. More than an hour later, Qin saw Liuli lifting her backpack and drinking tons of cherry-flavored cola in one breath. However, the chilled soda could not extinguish the raging anger in her heart. Her skirt fluttered and she kicked a tin can directly into the trash can, making a loud thud sound. Her anger level was almost on the table, and she could jump at any time. She not only spent a lot of time and energy planning for the recruitment activity of the Deductive Reasoning Society, but also called her best friend Yoko Sawada and her childhood sweetheart Yutaro Suda to help. She worked hard, begged, deceived, abducted, and tricked a whole room of people, but before she could show off the charm of the deductive reasoning method, she was completely destroyed by the small tricks of 7 Wu. The murderer was caught directly and had nothing to do with deductive reasoning. Even though Takashi Sekihara left and had the zombie Yutaro Suda get up and make a guest appearance in his character, his sense of empathy was greatly disrupted. No one felt that reasoning was the only way to find the murderer, and the group began to play tricks and show off their intelligence. In the end, the event was a big failure, and no one agreed to join the promising Deductive Reasoning Research Society on the spot. All of them had to reconsider. The meaning of reconsider is that it's no use, and she originally planned to get at least 2 signatures today. This is a very important opportunity. Next week, all the clubs in the school will start recruiting new members comprehensively. How could an unpopular new club compete with a popular old club? Maybe even the signatures for applying for a formal club cannot be gathered, and the club will become a fan club. You won't receive any club activity funds from the student union, and the fixed club activity venue will also be out of play. Bastard, half of my youth and college life have been ruined. Qin Liuli became more and more angry as she thought about it. She was about to have a cerebral hemorrhage when she suddenly saw a person pushing a flatbed truck far away. It was Kaiwanwu who had ruined her good deed over an hour ago. Why is he here? Why push so many things? Is it a thief? Qin Liuli instantly became alert and hid behind a utility pole, taking advantage of her physique to perfectly conceal herself while carefully observing Kaiwanwu and his cart. On the cart were dilapidated tables, chairs, and benches, with 2 vertical banners standing, seemingly signs. It's not like theft, it's like setting up a stall. Did this guy ruin my recruitment campaign just to come back early and prepare these rags to set up a stall? Qin Liuli's gaze followed Kaiwanwu as she watched him push the flatbed truck towards the small park in front of the station. Curious, she couldn't help but turn around and follow behind. When she arrived at the small park, she realized that she had made no mistake in her reasoning. Kaiwanwu began to unload the truck and set up a stall. What is this for sale? She couldn't help but turn to the front and look at the signboard of Kaiwanwu. On the left, she saw large calligraphy with words such as divination, spiritual communication, matchmaking, dispelling spirits, exorcism, talismans, feng shui, searching for people, finding things, dispelling doubts, answering questions. On the right, she saw, money can be used to grind and push ghosts, professional spiritual media, everything can be discussed, a new store opens, all discounts are offered, and those who are not spiritual don't need money. Qin Liuli was stunned. What a mess. Yo, isn't this Qin classmate? Qiuanwu also noticed Qin Liuli and didn't show much surprise. He smiled and waved his hand, saying, "We're meeting again. Are you planning to go home?" He knew that Qin Liuli was angry at him for ruining her recruitment campaign, but he didn't care. Anyway, he had agreed with the people at the garbage bin to buy some second-hand tables and chairs this afternoon, and asked them to clean them up and wait. If he didn't go, it wouldn't work. It was related to his eating problem, bigger than the sky. A little girl who likes to be angry or not. Qin Liuli felt even more aggrieved when she saw that he was as innocent as anyone else, but she was not someone without a family education or a city government. She cursed in her stomach but did not speak harshly in front of her. She walked over and pointed to his stall, asking seriously, "What are you doing?" Qiuanwu leaned back in his chair and smiled, working earns living expenses, and I also have to eat. Working. Qin Liuli is not surprised by high school students working, which is quite normal in Japan. She has been preparing to find a job for a while, such as working as a cashier at a convenience store, but Kaiwanwa's working style is also too strange. Does a high school student set up a stall to help people with divination and fortune-telling? Cheating money through crooked means. The distrust and shame in her eyes were so strong that they almost overflowed. Qiuanwu turned a blind eye and scratched the stall with his hand, laughing, "That's right. As you can see, I am a professional spiritual medium, and that's how I work." Spiritual medium. Just you. Qin Liuli pouted and said, "Even if you're a spiritual medium, you can't set up a stall here. This is a park and a public land in the town area. Hurry up and put away the stall, otherwise I'll tell Jiaofan and confiscate all your junk." 7 Original Wu smiled unchanged and took out a document from his pocket to show her. "Don't worry, the town autonomous committee has agreed, the patrol cannot control me." Qin Liuli took a strange look at the document and found that it was a permit issued by the town autonomous committee. The owner could occupy a limited amount of public land in the town to set up stalls without obstructing traffic, damaging the environment, or violating relevant regulations of the business law. In terms of both reason and law, the patrol officers could not take him for criticism and education. She glanced at the familiar private seal under the permit book and confirmed that it was not a forgery, which made it even more strange. She wondered, how did you get the approval of the town council? Someone who wanted to rent land and set up a stall here before was rejected. How could they give it to a scammer for nothing? Qiuanwu took back the permission letter and made a haha. "Qin classmate, speak politely. I'm not a scammer, I'm a spiritual medium, a professional spiritual medium." Qin Liuli insisted, "There are no ghosts or gods in this world. If you say you are a spiritual medium, then you are deceiving people. Whatever you think, but can you please step aside and don't affect my business?" Qiuanwu didn't care about Qin Liuli's opinion. This girl, Mao, was not his target customer. He casually pushed her aside and called out to a passing girl, this senior sister, yes, it's you. Please stay. The new store is opening today, come and take a seat." Qin Liuli was a bit angry about being pushed aside like garbage, but she didn't leave either. She is a staunch scientific and rational person who never believes in any divine or ghostly things in this world. She wants to stay here and see how 7 Yuan Wu deceives people. Probably through some small tricks, some language skills, and some chemical reactions to deceive ignorant people. And she, the daughter of the professor, a reasoning genius proficient in deductive reasoning, and the intellectual responsibility of Dongyu Town. The future famous detective will definitely be able to expose his deception on the spot. Damn it, if you dare to ruin my recruitment campaign, I'll smash your sign. Neither of us can think of a better time. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Stupid little fatty sheep everywhere. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Stupid little fatty sheep everywhere, yes. Are you calling me? The passing girl glanced at Chiyu-and-Wu, then at the beautiful JK clear sight glass, and then at the sign of the stall. She couldn't understand the situation and looked confused. Spiritual communication and divination are legal in Japan, and Japan does not combat feudal superstition. Related shops are common and popular on streets and temple fairs. She is not confused about roadside stalls like this, but Kaiwanwu looks too young and doesn't dress like a person in this industry. Kaiwanwu turned a blind eye to the confusion on her face and continued to wave with a smile. Yes, it's you. Senior sister is in distress, meeting is fate. Please come and sit down, it won't take up much of your time. If you're not satisfied, you don't need to pay 1 yen. The passerby girl hesitated for a moment and slowly walked over, feeling a bit embarrassed as she asked, "How do you know I'm in distress? Am I showing any signs of distress? Please sit down first." Chiyu-and-Wu pointed to the guest seat in front of the stall and asked the girl to sit down before explaining with a smile, "I am a spiritual medium, told by your spiritual energy." "The spiritual energy on me?" Chiyu-and-Wu said seriously, "Yes, your spiritual energy is like a clear spring and flowing water hitting the rocks. The music you play is beautiful, but the melody is somewhat melancholic." He spoke confidently, with a sincere expression in his eyes. The passerby girl became skeptical and tentatively asked, "Can you perceive why I am troubled?" Chiyu-and-Wu gently closed his eyes and after a moment, opened his eyes and smiled. "I heard the sound of the violin and felt uneasy." "Are you worried about the Spring National College Symphony competition?" The passerby girl covered her mouth in surprise and nodded repeatedly. "That's right, I'm just worried about this matter." She had been wanting to confide in someone for a long time, but when she saw that Kaiwanwu really had 2 tricks, she immediately said, "The senior sister who used to be the head of the violin club suddenly arranged for her to study abroad and couldn't participate in the competition. Teacher Kimura asked me to take over as the head, and I had to be in charge of the solo part. I don't know if I can do well, nor do I know if I can achieve good results in the competition. If it's because of me." As she spoke, she became worried again and hesitated. "Perhaps I should ask Teacher Kimura to choose another chief executive." Previously, the chief executive was usually handled by seniors in 3rd grade, and I have only just entered 2nd grade. It doesn't seem good to break tradition. Are you ready to refuse? Chiyu-and-Wu pondered for a moment and asked with a smile, "Refusal is not impossible, but you have been practicing so hard, won't you be unwilling? You must have also thought about taking on the role of chief and taking on the solo part in formal competitions, right?" The passerby girl was stunned and embarrassed, saying, "I'm not really trying hard. I have been practicing consistently throughout the spring break, and I have worked very hard." The passerby girl was surprised and covered her mouth, saying, "How do you know I've been practicing all this time during the vacation?" Perceived. Kaiwanwu tapped his forehead with his index finger and smiled, "You often immerse yourself fully in the music, and your spiritual energy will naturally be affected. This cannot be concealed from others. Is that so?" The passerby girl looked at Chiyu-and-Wu with a little admiration in her eyes. She didn't expect to encounter such a professional spiritual medium while walking, feeling more powerful than those who officially opened a store. Chiyu-and-Wu nodded heavily and said, "That's right, so I think since you have already put in effort, why give up the opportunity to prove yourself? Why bother giving it a try?" The passerby girl's face changed and she hesitated for a moment, then said dejectedly, "Although I tried my best to practice, I'm still not sure. If I mess up, everyone will blame me behind my back, and no one will recognize me as the chief in the future. The situation will become even worse. It's better not to force myself from the beginning." Qi Yuanwu shook his head and said seriously, actually, even if you mess up, it's impossible for everyone to not recognize you. At least one person will cheer for you, applaud for you, and recognize your performance no matter what. Who? Your guardian spirit. Guardian spirit. The passerby girl couldn't help but turn her head and take a look. Of course, she didn't see anything. She turned her head and exclaimed in disbelief, I have a guardian spirit. Can you see it? Of course, everyone has a guardian spirit, and as a professional spiritual medium, I can naturally sense it. Qi Yuanwu's expression was serious and solemn. What does my guardian spirit look like? The passerby girl felt a little convinced, curious and a little scared in her heart. Please give me your hand. Qi Yuanwu extended his hand, palm up, gesturing for the passerby girl to put her hand up. After waiting for the passerby girl to follow suit, he closed his eyes and silently felt for a moment before whispering, she is quite old, with wrinkles at the corners of her eyes and a warm and kind aura. It should have originated from your grandmother. No, it originated from your grandmother. The passerby girl couldn't help but turn her head again, her expression of fear disappearing, but she said in confusion, my grandmother has been guarding me. She hasn't gone to heaven. She has already gone to heaven, leaving only care and love for you. This idea has become your guardian spirit. She really enjoys listening to you play the violin and also likes the way you work hard. The passerby girl was stunned for a moment before murmuring, so that's it. That's right, she used to love me very much and enjoyed listening to me practice the piano. She often sits on the corridor and listens to it all afternoon. Qi Yuanwu nodded and said, so, there's no need to worry about failure, just play for her. As long as you put in effort and play wholeheartedly, even if you fail, she will still smile and applaud for you. She believes in you, looks forward to you, why don't you believe in yourself? After speaking, he even smiled behind the passerby girl. The passerby girl couldn't help but turn around and take a glance. When she turned around, her expression changed for a while, as if she had made up her mind. She nodded hard, her voice even louder, as if wanting the guardian spirit to hear her. I will work even harder, I will definitely strive for a perfect performance. I believe in you, said Kiyohara Takashi with a smile. The passerby girl's face turned red and she felt embarrassed again. She stood up and bowed, thank you for your words. Thank you for telling me these things, which have taken away my troubles. Then she took out her wallet and said with some embarrassment, how much should I pay? Sorry, I didn't bring too much pocket money out today. Qi Yuanwu quickly glanced at her wallet and found that there were not many children inside. He shook his head and smiled, the new store is open, and you are my first customer. It's free, and he said, then opened a paper box and handed her a wooden carving. Lucky talisman, I have blessed you with spiritual power. With it, no matter what difficulties you encounter, as long as you maintain courage, face difficulties directly, and believe that you can do it, it will bring you good luck. The passerby girl didn't expect that Kaiwanwa not only wouldn't accept the money, but also gave a small gift, making her even more embarrassed. She quickly declined, no, thank you. I can't take it, and I should pay for it. I really don't need it. General Chiyuan forcefully handed her the lucky talisman and smiled, if you feel embarrassed, then do me a favor and introduce me to your friend. If not accepted, what daily reminders would this girl use to help him with advertising? Seeing his sincere and resolute attitude, the passerby girl felt embarrassed to take the talisman and solemnly tied it to her backpack. After asking a few more questions about the guardian spirit, she reluctantly said goodbye. Her footsteps were noticeably lighter, and she even turned back and bowed after walking far away. Qi Yuanwu smiled and waved his hand, but as the guest left, he relaxed his sitting posture and said strangely to Qin Jianliuli, who had been standing by for a long time, why haven't you come home yet? Qin Jianliuli was in a daze. She had originally intended to expose the scam of Kaiwanwu through clever reasoning, but from beginning to end, she couldn't find a chance to interject. Even after watching the whole process, she began to feel confused. This is too unscientific. There must be no ghosts in this world, and the guardian spirit is even more nonsense. But how did this guy really deceive that ignorant senior sister? She couldn't help but ask, "How did you do it?" "I told you before, I am a professional spiritual medium." "I don't believe it." Chiyuan-Wu sneered and said, "Do you believe it has anything to do with me? I'm not a scammer, but can you leave and not hinder my work here?" Qin Liuli's eyes narrowed slightly, feeling a bit angry. She wanted to say something but couldn't figure out what she could say, but she walked away in such a disheveled manner and was very unwilling. If she didn't figure out what tricks were involved, she felt that she wouldn't even want to sleep well this month. She would definitely ponder over and over again, and maybe her worldview would start to waver. To be honest, her worldview is a bit unstable now, and she feels like the world is suddenly a bit surreal. She held it there for a while, then deftly turned around and sat down opposite Kaiwanwu. She opened her backpack and took out a cartoon pig-shaped wallet, slamming it heavily on the table. Her eyes were sharp, and her breath was constantly churning. Behind her, a line of big characters was vaguely drawn. "I must figure it out, no one should stop me." Chi-Yuan-Wu's eyes lit up when he saw the little fat pig. He immediately sat up straight and asked enthusiastically, "Qingjian classmate, is there anything I can do for you?" Qingjian Liuli pointed to his sign with the 4 big characters, "Answer questions, solve doubts," and said, "If you provide answer questions and solve doubts, then I will pay. I am your customer now, you must give me a satisfactory answer, and no more nonsense can be used to perfunctory me." Chiyuan-Wu was taken aback for a moment and chuckled, "Are you so curious?" Qingjian Liuli said seriously, "Curiosity is the driving force of human progress. Curiosity is not wrong, and a strong curiosity is a good thing." "Okay." Chiyuan-Wu estimated the plump size of little pig's wallet again and smiled nonchalantly, "One question costs 1,000 yen. We'll give you a 50% discount when we open a new store. We'll answer any questions and ensure you're satisfied." "Is it 500 yen? For a college student, I can eat 2 bowls of ramen noodles, but it is more important to find out the truth." Qingjian Liuli didn't even bargain with him. He took out a 500 yen coin and slapped it on the table, directly asking, "How did you do it just now?" Kaiwanwu still has professional ethics. He reached out and wiped the coin on the table, and the coin disappeared. He said honestly, "I used mind reading." Qingjian Liuli said, "I paid for it, don't say such nonsense anymore." "It's not a lie," explained Kaiwanwu patiently. "It's not a psychic mind-reading technique that you understand, it's a cold reading technique in the psychological sense." What does cold reading technique mean? It refers to observing, hinting, and guiding others' thoughts without preparation, in order to understand and guess others' thoughts accurately at the first meeting, thus enabling better communication with others. It is commonly used in psychotherapy. After Kaiwanwu finished explaining, he looked at Qingjian Liuli as if he were looking at a simple and ignorant little fat sheep, with a smile in his eyes. The world's civil internet has just started. Before the information explosion, the definition of mind reading is not common sense. Otherwise, just remind me that the fat sheep in front of us is wrong, and this student can react to it. There is no need to say so in detail. Compared to the 21st century, the 1990s can really be considered a paradise for spiritual media, with silly little fat sheep everywhere. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Qin Kiss. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Qin Kiss. Qingjian Liuli didn't pay attention to Kaiwanwu's expression and was already stunned. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly realized that this skill seemed familiar. Isn't it a skill that many famous detectives in detective novels have? Originally, it wasn't an exaggeration from a novel. Is there really someone in reality who can do it? But she still couldn't figure out how to read it, so she couldn't help but ask, how do you know that senior sister is troubled by the competition, and how do you know she is practicing the violin? It's very simple. Qin Jianliuli waited for a moment, but Qiuanwu smiled and didn't continue. Feeling angry, he took out another 500 yen coin from Little Pig's wallet and patted it on the table. Qiuanwu then tapped his ear and neck and smiled, saying, she has a Qin Kiss. The Qin Kiss on the violin is caused by rubbing the neck with the violin, and it's red like a kiss mark, so it's called a Qin Kiss. She also has thin calluses on her fingers that press the strings, so she naturally practices the violin. As for the competition, an experienced teacher can tell the frequency and intensity of students' practice by observing the Qin Kiss, and that senior student is very hardworking at first glance. So I worked hard to practice the piano, and since the beginning of school, I have been practicing even more until now. Plus, that senior sister is wearing the uniform of Qingshui Women's School. As far as I know, Qingshui Women's School is a regular in the finals of the National College Symphony competition, so she is naturally preparing for the competition. If she is troubled, 80% of it comes from this Qin Kiss, such a beautiful name. Qin Jianliuli was lost in thought. She heard for the first time that there would be a kiss when playing the violin, but she tried hard to recall, but couldn't remember whether there were any red marks on the senior sister's neck just now, and the thin calluses on her fingers were even more unforgettable. Who had time to carefully examine someone's neck and fingers? Isn't that sick? However, she can accept the explanation of Kaiwanwu, which is more acceptable to her than unscientific teleportation. She immediately asked, what if you guess wrong? Qiuanwu said nonchalantly, if you guess wrong, then guess wrong. You won't die, just change the customer. This is also true. Qin Jianliuli's secret path, Qiuanwu, is indeed cunning, and upon hearing it, he is not a novice fraudster. She thought for a moment and then asked, what's going on with the guardian spirit? How did you know her grandmother passed away? 7 Yuan Wu looked at her Little Pig wallet and saw Liuli expressionlessly take out 500 yen and pat it on the table. 7 Yuan Wu wiped the coin with his hand, and he didn't know where the money was hidden. Then he calmly said, I used the negative resistance reaction in psychometry. Mind testing. To be more specific, I paid for it. Qin Jianliuli didn't understand. Qiuanwu said, at that time, I was holding her hand flat. Did you notice where my index finger was sticking to her? Qin Jianliuli recalled for a moment, but didn't recall it, but she guessed in her heart, pulse. No, it stuck on the inner side of her wrist, explained Takashi Sekihara patiently. The muscles there are controlled by the sympathetic nervous system and have body autonomy. Through the changes in the muscles there, if you have experience, you can easily determine a person's current psychological state of confrontation. Whether they agree or disagree with you, it's an instinct, and without professional training, it's almost impossible to fake. So I first mentioned that it was an elderly person who did not show obvious resistance psychologically, and then I guessed it was her grandmother. Her psychological resistance immediately reached its peak, with a strong sense of negation, indicating that her grandmother was still alive, so I changed my mind and said it was her grandmother. Unfortunately, her grandmother did indeed pass away. Qin Jianliuli didn't expect that there were so many tricks in being a scammer, so she asked after him, what if her grandmother and grandmother were all alive? Qiuanwu smiled and said, let's continue to guess her ancestors, either the grand ancestral mother or the grandmother, but the effect will be slightly worse. I see. Qin Jianliuli completely understood. The student at the same level in front of her was very skilled and had thick skin. Perhaps she was not only a novice fraudster, but also a senior fraudster. She slowly straightened her waist and back, lifted her chin, and her righteous aura churned incessantly, disdainfully saying, so, I'm not wrong in my reasoning. You're a fraud. You deceived that senior sister, you deceived her. Well, although you didn't cheat her money, you tricked her into advertising for you, preparing to deceive more people, and your mind is even worse. Seeing that Liuli was not paying, Qiuanwu's attitude immediately changed. He leaned back, crossed his legs, and smiled faintly. I didn't lie to her. Qingjian Liuli loudly said, you're just lying, you just admitted. If she were a beautiful girl warrior, now it means the moon has extinguished this year. I didn't lie to her, Qiuanwu repeated with a smile. The supervising teacher of that senior sister recognized her strength with a high level of professionalism. As a third-grade student, she was appointed as the principal violinist in charge of solo, indicating that the senior sister's ability to participate in the competition was absolutely not a problem, it was just a lack of confidence. If my senior's grandmother was here, would she advise her to continue lacking confidence and give up this opportunity to showcase her hard work? Would you advise that senior sister to give up her promise of being admitted to university and achieving fame in one fell swoop? Would that senior student not applaud for her after participating in the competition? No, she only says the same thing as me. After a pause, he smiled faintly and said, spiritual media is a profession that speaks for the deceased. I said what I wanted to say for the deceased, and it has nothing to do with fraud. If you don't understand, don't speak recklessly. Qingjian Liuli was momentarily speechless, feeling that Qiuanwu's words seemed reasonable. She then accused him of feeling a bit unreasonable and weak, but felt that something was still not quite right in her heart. She insisted, you have been deceived, even if your starting point is good, but you cannot telepathize at all. This is deception. Qiuanwu stopped shaking his chair one by one and said strangely, when did I say I can't telepathize? I used mind reading and mind testing, but what does this have to do with whether I can telepathize? Qingjian Liuli had originally planned to let him go, as long as he was willing to bow down and admit that he had used scams. This guy was indeed scamming money, but he still seemed to have some moral bottom line, not causing any bad consequences, and not entirely a jerk. It seemed like it was okay for him to set up a stall here, so there was no need to drive him away. But at this point, he even dared to die with a duck's mouth hard. Her anger rose again and she loudly said, then help me telepathize and give it a try. Her grandparents are all alive, her mother can fight with a bear, and her father and mother have been living together for so many years and are still alive. Their vitality is definitely stronger than cockroaches. My younger sister is a bare child, lively and energetic, unable to even kick 300 feet to die. She feels like she can carry a nuclear explosion with her body. She wants to see what tricks Qiuanwu, a scammer, can say on her condition. If he can't say it or dare not even say it, don't blame her for being unreasonable. Today, he will tear off his banner. Qiuanwu didn't refuse, so he spread his hand and signaled to Qingjian Liuli to put his hand on it. He smiled and said, okay, the new store is open, and I'm a classmate again. It's better to charge you 500 yen. Qingjian Liuli sneered and slapped the money before putting his hand on it. He closed his eyes and began to feel it, not caring where he placed his fingers. I want to see, can you say who died in my house became my guardian spirit? After waiting for a while, she looked at Qiuanwu and didn't speak. She sneered, which ancestor of mine is my guardian spirit planning to say? Well. Qiuanwu hesitated for a moment and said strangely, it's a bit unbelievable to say, but your guardian spirit seems to be a dog. Dog. Qingjian Liuli was stunned for a moment, but didn't get angry. He hesitated and asked, what breed of dog is it? I feel that your personality is very gentle, with long and golden hair. I think your guardian spirit should come from a golden hair. Jin Mao. Qing saw that Liuli's voice was trembling a bit, and he trembled in his voice. Is it called Guangtai? Perhaps, as an outsider, you are not sure. The guardian spirit is not a ghost. It is a positive spiritual energy body, a collection of someone's caring and protective beliefs before death. The name has no meaning for him. He is him, but not him either. You need to be clear about this. Qin Liuli nodded blankly and agreed with Qian Wu's statement. After all, he was a professional. She asked expectantly, that light is too golden hair. No, my guardian spirit, can you talk to me? Qian Wu nodded and said, we can only simply convey some ideas. It says, don't be so curious in the future, don't fall into the river recklessly, don't walk and think recklessly, be careful of vehicles and traffic lights when crossing the road, and never get hurt again. Also, you are getting older and have already entered college. This is a very critical period in life, and working harder at this time may save a lot of energy for the future. Therefore, it asks you to focus on your studies as much as possible and not stay up all night reading detective novels and comics. Qian Wulua chattered incessantly for a moment, talking only about trivial life matters. However, Qin Liuli listened attentively and couldn't help but nod repeatedly, convinced that it was his own Wang Zhaoguang. It was absolutely right. When she went to kindergarten, her classmates all said there was a river boy under the bridge. She was very curious and after school, she leaned over the bridge railing, bent down, and looked down hard. However, she couldn't grasp it firmly and fell into the river, almost drowning. If it weren't for Guantai coming to pick her up from school, jumping into the water and carrying her ashore, perhaps the grass on her grave would have been 3 feet high by now. She did indeed have a traffic accident due to her tendency to daydream while walking. She accidentally got hit by a bicycle at a traffic light and injured her foot. She sat at home for half a month and spent so much time lying at her feet, even following her to the restroom with unease. As for staying up all night reading mystery novels and comics, it's her personal hobby. Sometimes when she's obsessed with reading, she can't figure out how the killer committed the crime. She spends all night drawing pictures and figuring out mud models for reasoning, which is quite common. As she listened, her eyes gradually moistened and she murmured, it turns out it has been silently guarding me, and I never realized it. Sorry, Wang Jiang. I used to worry you, but I will never fall into the river again. I will pay attention to traffic safety when walking, and I will not endure any longer try to stay up late as little as possible. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Joker turns out to be myself. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Joker turns out to be myself. As the sun sets in the west and night approaches, the temperature begins to drop. However, seeing Liuli clearly makes her body feel warm. There is nothing in this world that feels warmer than being silently guarded by friends. She was immersed in this kind of emotion and couldn't extricate herself for a moment, but besides being moved, she also felt a bit confused in her heart. It turns out that there are actually guardian spirits in this world. Are those ghosts and gods not illusory, but real? Science may not always be right. Her worldview was refreshed, leaving her somewhat at a loss. She instinctively wanted to question a few words, but remained speechless. Guantai was her best friend when she was a child, the big dog that grew up with her. She died of old age when she was in 5th grade of elementary school, and now not many neighbors remember it, let alone a stranger named Kaiwanwu. Moreover, things like falling into the water 11 or 12 years ago or having a traffic accident in elementary school are not observable through appearance, so even if her worldview is refreshed, she cannot doubt that teleportation is the only logical explanation, even if it is not scientific. It turned out that the clown was actually me, and because of superstition in science, I started to speak out loud, thank you, and I'm sorry for my previous impoliteness. Qin Liuli may have a bit of a girl's arrogance, but her upbringing is indeed good. She is not the kind of person who never admits her mistake. When she realized she misunderstood someone else, she immediately lowered her proud head, and even suffered some setbacks. In the future, she dared not call herself Dongyu Town Intellectual Responsibility, Future Detective Miss Liuli, or Future Detective Liuli Police Department. Qi Yuanwu sat on the chair, waved his hand generously, and smiled, saying, knowing your mistakes can make corrections. There's nothing great about good We're all classmates, so there's no need to worry about the past. I'll say goodbye, thank you again. Although she was hit and paid for the service, Qin Jianliuli still felt that she should be grateful to Qiuanwu. Otherwise, she might never know that Guangtai's faith was still with her, let alone pay attention to Guangtai's reminders and care. Qiuanwu smiled and waved his hand, it's nothing, goodbye. Qin Jianliuli nodded, picked up her backpack, turned around and left. After taking a few steps, she looked at the familiar town park and suddenly felt a bit unfamiliar. It turned out that science cannot explain everything, and there are still many mysterious things in this world that science cannot solve. She couldn't help but look back at Qiuanwu again and found him leaning back in his chair, observing passers-by with interest. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his mouth smiled, only looking at his temperament revealed in the dim light, much like a cunning fox searching for fat sheep. Her heart couldn't help but move again. Wait a minute, when he helped the senior sister telepathize before, I couldn't figure out how he did it. So now that he helps me telepathize, will there be any dark tricks inside? No, I have to figure out what's going on myself. Thinking of this, she quickly turned around, took 3 steps in 2, and then returned to the 7 yuan Marshall table. She patted her wallet again on the table and said seriously, I want to purchase QA service. Qiuanwu looked at her and said speechlessly, what do you want? I want to know how you did it just now. Qin saw that Liuli's face was full of stubbornness. I want to listen to the truth. Then she threatened again, you must be able to see that I have a strong curiosity. If I can't figure it out, I will come to you every day until I figure it out. You can't live a day. In the bizarre life of Qiuanwu, it was also the first time I had seen a girl with such distinctive features like Qin Jianliuli. Looking at her for a moment, I couldn't help but laugh. His target customers have never been students, they only have a few children, and he came out to set up a stall just to establish his reputation and expand his popularity. Once he has a certain level of reputation and social credibility, he can find a way to make a big news story, publish it in the newspaper, and then use it as a stepping stone to participate in several TV variety shows, obtain a golden signboard, and become a star-level, mysterious spiritual medium. At that time, there will be a chance to find a truly fat sheep and make a lot of money. The student will only have a few thousand yen in his pocket at most, and he will spend a lot of money. A few thousand yen won't be enough to cover his expenses. He is looking for a wealthy bastard, not a poor student who has never done anything wrong. Furthermore, he has some connection with Qin Jianliuli, and teasing her is not a big deal. It's not necessary to treat him like a fat sheep. He chuckled and said, okay, but make sure you don't get angry and promise not to harm my business in the future. Qin Jianliuli now only wanted to find out the truth and immediately said, as long as your answer satisfies me, I promise not to be angry, promise not to tell anyone, promise not to get the money back, and promise not to affect your stall in the future. Money is not as important as ideas. As long as she can understand the truth, she doesn't need to rebuild her values. Upon seeing her promise, Kiyohara Takashi immediately smiled and said, the chairman of the Dongyu Town Autonomous Committee, is Mrs. Kiyohara Kazuko, the commanding officer. If the Town Autonomous Committee were placed in China, it would probably be equivalent to a street office, neighborhood committee, and property center. However, the members are elected and generally consist of housewives, men do not have time to work, so it is sometimes also called a mother's association. Qin Jianxiangzi, the mother of Qin Jianliuli, was the president of the Dongyu Town Mothers Association. It was not because her mother was very capable, but because of her high social status and relatively easy to be respected that she was chosen. In Japan, professions such as teaching, doctors, lawyers, and writers were considered helpful people and would be honored with the title of teacher, which was widely respected. Her father was a university professor, considered the final form of a teacher, and also worked part-time as a writer. Her mother also became a teacher's mother, so choosing a president was highly regarded and naturally became a success. But what's going on here? Qin Lioli said inexplicably, what's wrong with my mother being the president of the Mama Association? What's the relationship with her now? What kind of reasoning are you playing with in your brain? Would it be better to change your interests and hobbies? Chi Yuanwu looked at her speechlessly for a while and further explained, there are two types of mind-reading techniques. Cold reading, which I have explained to you before, and hot reading. By investigating the background of the target person in advance, we can fully understand them, so that we can guide them in a targeted manner during communication, making it easier for her to accept your psychological guidance. Qin Lioli slowly opened her mouth wide and said, are you saying? That's right. Takeshi Sekihara took out the permit for setting up a stall and occupying land, and smiled, pointing to the private seal below. I moved to Dongyu Town 2 days ago, and on the same day, I visited your mother's house. Your mother warmly welcomed me. I heard that when I was also going to attend a private UAE university, she even mentioned you and showed me your family album, telling me a lot of interesting stories about your childhood. No wonder you bastard said it so accurately. I know everything from 11 or 12 years ago. It turned out that my mother told you, you bastard scammer who should have been burned by hell's fire for 1,000 years. Qin Lioli completely understood and recalled that she had been deceived into crying before. In an instant, she became ashamed and angry, and her fists became hard. Chi Yuanwu had a keen sense of crisis and immediately leaned back in tactics, reminding him, you promised not to get angry, but now you're not ready to keep your word, are you? Seeing that Lioli was being held back and unable to fight, Qin gritted his teeth and said, you big scammer. Chi Yuanwu sighed and said, why don't you understand? I am a spiritual medium, a person who speaks for the dead. If Guantai is still alive, it will definitely remind you to pay attention to traffic safety, stop staying up late, and focus on your studies. Where's the problem? But. Qin Lioli's lips began to tremble, but my emotions before. I was. Kaiwanwu said, forgetting is the beginning of death. As long as you remember it, it is your guardian spirit, and no one can prove that it does not exist. Therefore, as long as you believe it is still there, it will always be with you. This sentence was undeniable even to Qin Lioli, as there was no fart to let go. However, when Chi Yuanwu saw that it was safe, he sat back in his chair and was about to completely drive away her troublemaker. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he reached out and pulled her aside, whispering, fat sheep, no, the customer has arrived. You promised not to harm my business, remember what you said. Qin Lioli looked back in surprise and saw a middle-aged woman dressed in a fashionable way walking towards the stall, followed by 2 black suit attendants. Then in her ear came the enthusiastic greeting of Chi Yuanwu, Madam, are you looking for someone? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Searching for People. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Searching for People, how did you know she was looking for someone? Originally, a middle-aged woman wanted to come over, but 2 men in suits behind her looked helpless and tried to dissuade her. Upon hearing Kaiwanwu's greeting, they all looked over with wary eyes. Chi Yuanwu nodded at his forehead and smiled, perceived. 2 men in suits glanced at each other, half believing and half skeptical, but their dissuasion was not as firm. The middle-aged woman, who had no choice but to see Kaiwanwu's signature, and was preparing to become a live horse doctor, now her confidence increased. She quickly walked over and said, that's right, I want to find someone. Chi Yuanwu's gaze quickly swept over the middle-aged woman's branded leather bag, platinum wedding ring in her hand, watch on her wrist, and handcrafted high-order jacket, with a smile on her face. I want to make it clear that the cost of finding someone is slightly higher, charged based on the length of time, starting at 50,000 yen. Of course, you don't have to worry about wasting money. If you can't find it, I won't pay a penny. As long as people can find it, money is not a problem, interrupted the middle-aged woman Fei Yang before he could finish speaking. Okay, I like people like you who enjoy themselves. Qi Yuanwu's enthusiasm immediately doubled. He reached out and pulled Qin Jianliuli, who was in the way, aside. He pointed to the chair and said, "Sit down, please sit down. Please sit down first. Could you please give me a rough idea of the situation, madam? This middle-aged woman is indeed anxious. Sitting down is like pouring beans out of a bamboo tube, and she explains the trouble in detail. Her name is Takamatsu Daiko, and she is a director and senior director, family business, of a livestock automation equipment production company. She is currently supervising the development of a set of automated processing equipment for compound silage in ranches and horse farms. However, at this critical moment of research and development, her first engineer, Yuki Yamashita, disappeared. She was absent from work yesterday, but still hasn't seen anyone today. No one answered her phone calls, and there was no response when someone knocked on the door, which made her extremely anxious. The chief engineer in her field not only needs to be proficient in various automation equipment, integrated circuits, and programming, but also needs to understand animal husbandry, understand all aspects of ranches, horse farms, and breeding farms. She is an absolute composite talent with great value. There is no one to replace her for a while, and even if someone can be hired, it is not enough. The development progress of personnel replacement will definitely fall far behind the plan, and if the contract is not good, it will be a breach of contract. She was really anxious and had to use her connections to find someone, but ended up with no success. Upon hearing this, Qin Jianliuli couldn't help but interject, "Isn't this kind of thing supposed to be reported to the police?" Qi Yuanwu gave her a displeased look and scolded, "Don't talk too much. Can Mrs. Takamatsu not think of such a simple matter? The two behind her are police officers." After speaking, he smiled at the two men in suits, and the two suit detectives looked at him in surprise, unsure of how they had been identified. Madame Takamatsu also turned her head to look at the two detectives and turned her head in dissatisfaction, saying, "They haven't found anyone. They are preparing to go back and have their respective departments investigate. It's uncertain when they will find someone. If the police were to be in charge, she wouldn't have to see a dead horse working as a live horse doctor at a roadside stall." There was also a hint of anger towards these two incompetent detectives. They were a bunch of useless people who couldn't use their farts at critical moments. The money the company donates to the Road Police Association every year can be considered as feeding dogs. The two detectives had a slightly awkward expression on their faces. They went to their house at the foot of the mountain and did not find any problems. There were no signs of fighting, no bloodstains, and the doors and windows were not damaged. Only a pile of design drawings and planning documents were found. It felt like this mountain lord was also working when he returned home. It is highly likely that the work pressure was too high, and the string broke, leading to self-exile. This may sound a bit nonsensical, but it's not a rare thing in Japan. There are a large number of homeless people on the streets of Japan, most of whom are bankrupt, lazy, or have committed crimes. However, there are also a few who, like Yuki Yamashita, are overwhelmed by long hours of high-intensity work and inexplicably start wandering. They have really seen this kind of thing before. People have gone missing, and their family and friends are anxious. They cry and demand that the police find someone, and the police invest a lot of police force in searching. In the end, they find that the guy is baking a gasoline barrel by a remote small river, with a relaxed and comfortable expression on his face, which is very speechless. If it weren't for this Mrs. Takamatsu finding their director, who gave them a death order, they would have found the person as soon as possible. They would have left long ago and would not have accompanied them to ask the spiritual medium. Is it funny to rely on spiritual media to find people? It's not a TV drama. Qi Yuanwu didn't care if the two detectives were embarrassed or not, and after thinking for a moment, he said to Lady Takamatsu, "Since the situation is like this, Madam and Yamashita-san have no blood relationship or personal belongings. I need to go to the place where Yamashita-san lives to take a look." "No problem. Seeing that Kaiwanwo had said something serious, Mrs. Takamatsu's heart also gave rise to hope. She stood up and led the way with two very speechless detectives. They were about to go to the parking lot, and now they had turned back not far, in the apartment building on the other side of the park. Chiun-woo doesn't care about his small stall either. The tables and chairs he just bought from the garbage bin are not worth much money, and it's more important to slaughter fat sheep. But after taking a few steps, he heard footsteps behind him and turned around to see that Qin Jianliuli had also followed. He fell one step behind and said strangely, "What are you doing with me?" Qin Jianliuli's eyes flickered slightly, her eyebrows furrowed, and her cheeks blushed slightly. She felt embarrassed and said, I want to see if there's anything I can help with. After all, someone has gone missing. The more you can find someone, the better, right? Chi Yuan-woo waved his hand to drive away the flies and said directly, "You can't help, go home quickly. Your mother is waiting for you to eat." Qin Jianliuli was furious and felt undervalued, but she was now extremely curious. If she wasn't allowed to follow and see what happened, she probably wouldn't want to sleep tonight. She was a genius detective girl who had read hundreds of detective novels and comics. When faced with a case, even if it was just a disappearance case, it was still a serious case with police involvement. How could she not go to the crime scene to see it? The situation was stronger than human, and she turned angry. However, she didn't dare to get angry with Chiun-woo and could only let go in a low voice. "I haven't finished accounting for what you lied to me before. I'm afraid you'll run away, so I have to follow you." Chi-Yuan-woo has no good way to deal with her now. He can't argue with her in front of fat sheep, or kick her in the butt and kick her home. It's easy to lower his demeanor and damage his image as a master. He can only whisper, "Then don't cause trouble for me." As long as Qin Jianliuli could participate in the case, everything would be easy to say. She immediately nodded vigorously and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll follow and take a look. I won't cause any trouble." Kaiwanwo ignored her no longer and took a quick 2 steps to find Lady Takamatsu to get in touch with her, while Qin saw Liuli following behind and her face turned red with excitement. Follow and see. How could that be possible? Who can still say for sure if they can find someone? Maybe this is the debut of Detective Miss Liuli, a college student. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Perceived Searching Technique. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Perceived Searching Technique. The Yamashita family is located on the top floor of an 8-story apartment building with house number 801. The apartment manager was somewhat surprised by the police going back and forth, but didn't say anything. He took the spare key and went upstairs to open the door, releasing the group led by Takashi Sekihara. Upon seeing Liuli enter the door, Qin took a deep breath and felt a bit intoxicated. This is the scent of the crime scene. I have been studying mystery novels for so many years. No, I have been studying deduction methods for so many years, and finally I can apply them. She slowly exhaled the air from her lungs and instantly became mentally tense. Her gaze was sharp, like a police dog, and she began to glance left and right. The apartment has a large area and is a 1L1D2R unit, which is a large apartment with 1 living room, 1 dining room, 2 rooms, and separate bathrooms and bathrooms. 2 rooms, 1 is a bedroom, and the other has been converted into a studio, filled with documents, drawings, and various electronic components. The living room and dining room cabinets have also been modified and transformed into flower racks, displaying many potted plants and greenery. Well, the head of household has a good income situation and values work very much. He may be a workaholic. Qin Jianliuli took advantage of the opportunity that no one was paying attention to her and quickly wandered around the rooms, not letting go of any suspicious places. However, as she turned around, she couldn't help but fall into contemplation. Unlike in detective novels, the protagonist usually finds something unusual at the crime scene, but this room is too normal. The floor is clean without any foreign objects, and there is not a single strand of hair. The doors and windows are intact, not to mention broken, without even scratches. The bed furniture is neat, everything is in its original place, and even the clothes hanging on the balcony hang like troops awaiting inspection. It doesn't look like there have been any cases here, there's nothing strange about it. She stood there frowning and thinking for a while, then turned to find the apartment manager and whispered, "Uncle, when was the last time you saw Sang at the foot of the mountain?" The apartment manager gave her a strange glance and didn't quite understand who she was, but he didn't refuse to answer. The police officer asked before, and the last time I saw San Xia was after 9 p.m. the day before yesterday, when he had just returned from work. Have you never seen him again since then? No. Qin Lioli pondered and said, so that means he hasn't left this building. The apartment manager looked at her speechless for a moment, then waved his hand and said, Classmate, this is an apartment building, not a prison. I don't always keep an eye on the door. Did Sang leave at the foot of the mountain when I wasn't paying attention or when I was busy at other times? I can't guarantee it. That's what I said to the police officers before. Qin Lioli felt slightly embarrassed and whispered, that's what you're saying. Then she thought for a moment and asked eagerly, have you noticed anything unusual these past few days? For example, hearing some strange sound, suddenly seeing a dark figure, thinking you're dizzy. Or did you see strange marks or objects suddenly appearing somewhere in the apartment building? Generally speaking, when a novel reaches this point, it is time for passers-by to provide clues to the detective, and an unintentional sentence can directly wake up the detective. The apartment manager became increasingly confused about who she was and looked at her like a fool. No, everything in the building has been normal these past few days, and if you ask, the previous police officers have already asked. I see that the glass face is numb. Why don't you play cards according to the routine? How can I solve the case? She began to find herself in a difficult situation. Based on the current situation, it seems that Yamashita may have just left home to relax, at least voluntarily, and there is no way to trace her. It seems that there is no other good way except to make the various departments pay attention. Isn't that a trip in vain? She was greatly disappointed, but immediately became nervous again. It's broken. If that guy can't find anyone and causes the police and the victim to come for nothing, how will it end then? He will definitely be scolded then, right? Thinking of this, she became even more nervous and quickly went to find Chiyuan Wu. She found that this guy was carefully scrutinizing a potted plant, and suddenly became angry again. When has it been? You are still pretending to be mischievous here. Now there are police present, it's not the time for you to cheat money. She tugged at Chi Yuan Wu's back hem and whispered, stop pretending. In my opinion, Sang at the foot of the mountain may have gone out to relax. This is not something we can handle, let's go quickly. After a pause, she added, I'll apologize with you. You shouldn't be scolded. Why do you have to apologize with me? Chiyuan Wu glanced at her and didn't want to talk to her, but for the sake of her words, he casually said, it's not going out to relax. Isn't it a distraction? How do you know? Chiyuan Wuman casually explained, everything inside is clean and organized, with a schedule and fitness plan posted on the refrigerator. There is no alcohol or smoke at home, and the bookshelf is filled with books related to potted plants and horticulture. Some of them are obviously purchased for a long time and have been checked repeatedly, but they are still clean. Not only are they not stained at all, but they are not even rolled up at the corners. All of this indicates that Yuki Yamashita is a person with clear goals, very self-disciplined, and some may have a slight cleanliness fetish. He is extremely energetic, and in addition to high-intensity work, he also has the energy to maintain his interests and hobbies. He can take time to carefully take care of potted plants. It is hard to imagine such a person being overwhelmed by pressure and inexplicably going to play and relax. Qin Lioli was stunned and recalled the scene at home down the mountain. He felt that what he said seemed reasonable and immediately said, I have also noticed what you said, but Sang left voluntarily. We can't find any clues to determine what he did now, so all of what you said is useless. It's still up to the police to find someone. It's better for us to apologize and go back quickly. She still has a mentality of underage, afraid of offending adults. Chiyuan Wu is too lazy to talk about her and has no good way of saying, if you can't find it, keep looking. How can you make money easily? How can we find it? Qin saw Liuli being scolded and pouted, feeling a bit unhappy. She also wanted to find someone, but now there's nothing she can do. Qi Yuanwu's gaze turned back to the potted plant and he whispered, there is no flower fertilizer or gardening tools in the apartment. Qin Jianliuli looked at the potted plant in disbelief and said, at this time, are you still planning to fertilize the flowers? Qi Yuanwu didn't know what to say to her for a moment, and after a moment of silence, he said, this is the little moon concubine in the night yen family. It is an artificially cultivated species of the cactus family and the Epiphyllum genus, specially cultivated for human viewing. It has extremely strict requirements for the living environment. As long as the temperature, humidity, and soil pH don't match at all, it will die for you in 3 days. It can never be left here all the time. It's almost dead now. Then he twirled the soil in the pot again, placed it in front of his nose and sniffed it lightly, thinking, like the other pots, the last time we fertilized and watered was 2 or 3 days ago. Qin Jianliuli still couldn't figure it out and said in confusion, so. You're really stupid. Kaiwanwu said to Qin Jianliuli's head completely speechless. Yamashita Yoshitaka clearly has a place dedicated to caring for potted plants, and it's very close to here. Chiyuan, have you sensed the location of the Sang at the foot of the mountain? After waiting for a long time, Mrs. Takamatsu finally couldn't help but feel anxious and approached to ask. Chiyuan Wu shook his head and said, the aura here is very peaceful, and I haven't noticed much. Mrs. Takamatsu was greatly disappointed, and the two detectives also showed an unexpected expression. Meanwhile, Takashi Sekihara turned to the apartment manager and asked, Mr. Manager, I can sense from the scent of the Sang at the foot of the mountain that he often gets close to the green value. So he should have a greenhouse for caring for potted plants. Do you know the location? Before the apartment manager could answer, the taller and stronger member of the detective team spoke up and pointed to the ceiling, saying, it's right on the rooftop. We've already checked and everything is normal there. Police are not just idle people, they don't even need to reason. They just need to ask people when they see them, and they have already searched for places they can find. Moreover, if it weren't for Mrs. Takamatsu being a close relative of the director, he would have stopped this farce a long time ago, and now there's not much patience left. Taking the initiative to answer the conversation is also conveying a sense of impatience. If it weren't for Takashi Sekihara, he would never have taken the initiative to mention the greenhouse, ready to wait for him to perceive the apartment and drive him away. But unfortunately, it was discovered, which made him even more frustrated. Qi Yuanwu didn't care if the two detectives were patient or not. He thanked them and asked the administrator to lead the way. Qin saw that Liuli and Lady Takamatsu naturally followed, while the two detectives shook their heads helplessly and could only follow behind. I have no choice but to waste time looking at the greenhouse again. I'll finish watching it early and let these two little ghosts leave soon. Yamashita Yashisada's apartment is on the top floor, very close to the rooftop. As he walked, Takashi Sekihara suddenly stopped and tilted his head to look at the door of room 803. The tall and strong criminal police officer following behind sighed and said, so what's going on? Chiyuan Wu remained silent and lay on the door, looking inside through the cat's eye. His expression was playful, and his movements were a bit abnormal. Everyone was speechless, but Qin saw Liuli pulling hard at his hem, signaling him not to be so talkative and to get things done quickly. Chiyuan Wu shrugged his shoulders, smiled, and continued walking forward, climbing up the rooftop with everyone. Yamashita Yashisada's greenhouse has a large area and a high level of professionalism. It seems that he really enjoys potted gardening, let alone money. He has raised nearly 100 pots of flowers, big and small, including precious and rare varieties, which make people feel refreshed as soon as they enter. This is the last hope. It is estimated that the police can't go with them to search other places. It is clear that colored glaze mustered up her energy to explore everywhere. She found that there was nothing wrong here except potted plants, and even she didn't give up. She used a small shovel to turn over the fertilizer soil piled in one corner, and found that there were some yellow, black, dark red loose soil mixed with a small amount of sand and stones, not to mention people, and even insects. Alas, I shouldn't have come. Searching for someone is the professional field of the police. That guy's trying to cheat money with this is really fantastic. Qin Jianlioli was depressed and worried, and had already begun to consider how to apologize for Kaiwanwu when he was scolded later. Can we go back now? Detective Gao Zhuang said impatiently, we have searched here long ago and there are no suspicious places. If we go back early, we can issue a joint investigation notice, which will be more helpful for finding Sang at the foot of the mountain. There's no need to issue a joint investigation notice. Qi Yuanwu stared at a small Chinese tune, the azalea, for a moment before regretfully saying, the mulberry at the foot of the mountain is in the greenhouse. In the greenhouse? Where? Everyone was surprised and looked around. Here it is. Kaiwanwu took Xiaochun off the flower stand, carefully pulled out the flowers, and then pushed the flower pot to the ground. As the flower pot was lifted, a broken hand rolled out of the spilled soil and landed in front of Qin Jianlioli. The hand was cut off at the wrist level and buried in the flower pot for a period of time, presenting a dead fish white color with a slight bluish swelling. It rolled down to the ground and bounced twice. Qin Jianlioli stared at the severed hand with her mouth wide open for 3 seconds, then took 3 steps back and almost fell to the ground. She just likes detective novels, and it's her first time getting close to a corpse, even if it's just a broken hand, the psychological and physiological impact is very strong. Qi Yuanwu looked around the warm room again, reached out his finger and pointed at the flower rack one by one, then said calmly, these 2 pots, that 2 pots, and that row over there. The other parts of the mountain mulberry are inside. At this moment, the 2 detectives had already changed their expressions greatly. After quickly taking note of 7 Yuanwu's instructions, they looked at each other in disbelief. Originally, this high school student is truly a medium, capable of perceiving things that ordinary people cannot perceive. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Is not worth admiring at all. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 is not worth admiring at all. The body of the victim was found, and the nature of the case immediately changed. It went from an ordinary case of disappearance to a cruel case of murder and dismemberment. The short and thin detective immediately called for reinforcements, while the tall and strong detective immediately requested everyone to leave the greenhouse and return to Yamashita Yosuke's apartment for temporary rest, waiting for questioning. Mainly because Mrs. Takamatsu needed rest. After seeing her severed hand, she almost fainted on the spot and still has a pale face and continuous retching. Everyone turned back in the same direction. As they passed by 803, Takashi Sekihara paused, tilted his head to look at the door of 803, and then leaned over the cat's eye to look inside. No one thought he was pretending to be mischievous this time, and the tall and strong criminal police officer accompanying him politely asked, Chiyuan. Little master, did you perceive something? 7 Yuanwu Chong, the detective, smiled and didn't speak. He immediately started knocking on the door, and the detective didn't show any displeasure. Seeing him knocking on the door without responding, he immediately began to help with a very strict attitude. I am AY from the life safety lesson of Hirano Police Station. Open the door immediately. The door finally opened, but it was only half open, with anti-theft chains hanging inside. Half of the face of a man in his 40s, half bald on the top of his head, was revealed through the crack in the door. He forced himself to remain calm and asked, Officer, what's up? If there is a case, take off the anti-theft chain and open the door to cooperate with the search, said Detective AY without hesitation. He also doesn't care whether there is a search warrant or whether it is legal. Before the rise of the internet, the Japanese police had always been extremely rude in handling cases. In any case, as long as they don't attract journalists' attention, the public will not know. If the public doesn't know, there will be no public opinion pressure. Without public opinion pressure, everything is easy to say. It is impossible to compete with the big company with more than 296,000 people by individual strength. At this point in time, many Japanese criminal police officers, wearing black suits and shirts without piercing their waists, are more refined than those in the Yamaguchi and Yamaguchi groups. The middle-aged half-bald man dared not resist and hesitated to open the door, but AY didn't know what to search for and turned to look at Kaiwanwu. Chi Yuanwu raised his hand and grabbed the middle-aged half-bald man's wrist, stabbing straight in. Did you kill Sang at the foot of the mountain? The man's Adam's apple twitched and he opened his mouth like a dehydrated fish. Suddenly, he reacted and shook off Chi Yuanwu's hand, saying sternly and inwardly, "What do you mean?" Chi Yuanwu rubbed his hands and shook his head, saying, "It's really you. What kind of person are you killing? I don't know what you're talking about." The man took 2 steps back, looking puzzled. "I can't hide it," Chi Yuanwu looked at him and said, "Go to the convenience store to buy a bone-chopping knife and axe, buy a large amount of bleach and toilet detergent in the supermarket, and use a lot of water before. The water meter may have gone crazy, you can't explain it clearly." The man's face turned pale, and his legs began to tremble, making it difficult to stand still. Chi Yuanwu confirmed everything was correct, his gaze moved away from his face, and his tone softened. He patiently said, "Even if you are very careful and discard all the tools, and repeatedly rinse the floor with a large amount of bleach and toilet detergent, it is impossible to completely erase the marks. In such a big case, the forensic class will not just chisel open your floor. It is not troublesome, they will search inch by inch, and even dig out your sewer, so. When I stand in front of you and the police will inevitably investigate you, it's pointless for you to keep it a secret. It's better to honestly confess and surrender yourself." The half-bald man's defense was shattered. He had long been on tenterheads and living his days like a year. Now that the police had really stood in front of him, they had clearly begun to suspect him, and it was almost impossible for him to have any luck mentality again. He felt a sense of relief. He slowly sat down against the entrance wall and murmured, "I guessed this day would come, but I didn't expect it to be so soon." "Why did you kill Mr. Yamashita?" Mrs. Takamatsu understood from behind, shocked by how quickly Kaiwanwu found the real culprit, but also angry. "Bastard, now her chief engineer has died, and research and development work will inevitably fall behind plan. It's highly likely that she will breach the contract, and her company will lose a lot of money. This is really a shameless disaster, she can't even cry." The half-bald man was startled, shrank back, and explained with a pale face. "It's not my fault. I didn't want to kill him, it's him. It's him. It's really disgusting. The foam burst, I lost my job, and my previous investments were all wasted. The bank was pressing, and I just borrowed a sum of money from him. He. Qin Jianlioli couldn't help but ask, "He urged you to repay the money, don't you want to?" "No, I will pay back the money. As soon as the house price rises, I will pay back the money immediately." The half-bald man got excited and waved his hands, calling out, "I will definitely pay back the money. I don't want to default on my debts, it's because I was in a difficult situation and borrowed his money, and he looked down on me." "Why does he look down on you?" "He looks down on me everywhere and doesn't greet me with the same kind attitude as before. When he meets me, he lifts his chin and waits for me to say hello several times. I am obviously older than him. The night before yesterday, I invited him to my house for a drink, and he said that house prices may not rise for 10 or 20 years, so he told me not to rush. There's no need to rush to pay back the money. He always talks about repaying the money in front of me, with a haughty attitude on his face. Although I have helped him before, I couldn't help but hit him with a bottle, and he died. The half-bald man burst into tears and looked very regretful. I didn't mean to. He suddenly died, and I didn't expect. Let's leave these for the police station later. Another detective had already returned from the phone call, and now both detectives are present, and they can be officially arrested. Ono Interpol took out the handcuffs and handcuffed him. His partner looked at his watch and made a record. At 18.42 on the 4th, the suspect was arrested in Zayuding. The missing person died and the murderer was caught. The case is completely over, but Mrs. Takamatsu is very sad. However, it is uncertain whether she is grieving for the murder of her employees or for seeking compensation. Chiyuan Wuan comforted and said, "I'm sorry that things have developed like this." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Takamatsu." Madame Takamatsu regained her composure and used a delicate handkerchief to touch the corners of her eyes, wiping away tears and barely regaining her composure. She is also a seasoned white-collar worker who naturally understands that Chiyuan Wu is going to bid farewell. She took out a checkbook, quickly wrote down a string of numbers, tore it off, and handed it to him, using respectful language. "Thank you, Chiyuan sang. This is the agreed-upon reward, and the extra part is my little token of goodwill. Please don't mind." Although the situation was not satisfactory and there was a huge gap between her expectations and hers, she had no intention of defaulting on her debts. She was not crazy and would not offend talented people like Chiyuan Wu for just a little money. She even had the intention of getting married. After all, it was hard to say when she would ask for help again. Even though she was already busy for this period of time, she went to Chiyuan Wu to divine whether her future career would be smooth and if there would be any disasters. After all, this is the first time she has seen such a strong, spiritual medium. Qin Lioli stood behind Kaiwan Wu, tiptoed up and quickly glanced at the check, secretly smacking her tongue. For her, a female college student, 200,000 yen is definitely a huge sum of money, but Kaiwan will only manage to earn it back in just an hour. It turns out that being a scammer is a good profession. This income is very good. However, she didn't say anything strange either. In terms of emotions and reason, Chiyuan Wu took this money for granted. After waiting for Kaiwanwu and Mrs. Takamatsu to politely exchange contact information, she set out on the road home with him. The killer had already confessed directly, and they didn't need to take any more notes or leave fingerprints or footprints to assist in investigation. They just went back and pushed Kaiwanwu's cart. At this moment, the sky was completely dark and the half-full moon had risen. Looking at the bright moonlight, I could see that the glass had a dreamlike feeling for a moment. She participated in the investigation of a murder case today and personally caught the murderer. Although the process was not complicated enough and did not include some classic elements from detective novels, it was still a real murder case. More importantly, there was also Chiyuan Wu. They truly avenged a victim, presided over justice, and prevented the victim from falling into the abyss of blood with resentment, dying without closing their eyes. It's amazing. An hour ago, this was truly a scene that only appeared in her dreams, but now it has become a reality. This is truly the most wonderful day of life, at least before that, there has never been such an exciting and satisfying day. Qin Lioli thought to herself and turned her gaze to Kaiwanwu, suddenly showing a slight admiration for him. This guy is also a bit remarkable. If he hadn't found the body hidden in a flower pot, it would have been classified as a missing person case. The police would have gone back to issue a joint investigation notice, and he might not have come to the scene again. Maybe Yamashita Yuki's bones would have been forever hidden in the flower pot. At least, after the situation calms down, the killer will be more calm and further destroy the body, allowing Yamashita Yoshimasa to completely disappear. No one can deny that he played a crucial role in this case, and if Yamashita had a spirit in heaven, he should have said thank you to him. This guy may be a scammer, but he's really a bit powerful. Thinking of this, Qin Liuli couldn't help but ask Qi Yuanwu curiously, how did you do it? Qi Yuanwu was studying the check of this bank and felt that forging it was not too difficult. He casually replied, what? How did you discover that Sang's body was hidden in a flower pot at the foot of the mountain? Qin Liuli asked as she looked at Qi Yuanwu. This should be considered a blind spot in thinking. No one would have thought that a human body would be buried in a small flower pot. How did you think of that? Don't deceive me with perceiving spiritual energy, resentment, and so on. Qi Yuanwu folded the check and put it in his pocket. He patted it with satisfaction. With this unexpected wealth, he probably could deal with it for a while longer. However, he couldn't let go of the small money. Even if it was small, he could taste a fresh shrimp. He glanced at Qin Jian, little fatty sheep with sparkling eyes and a curious expression on his face, and said with a faint expression, as soon as I entered the greenhouse, I took a glance, thought with my knees, and found out. Qin Liuli furrowed her eyebrows, squinted her eyes for a moment, and then took out the half-fat, not thin cartoon pig wallet, ready to purchase the QA service. The previous admiration for him dissipated. This scammer who desperately wants money will eventually fall into the abyss and be burned by the industry for 1,000 years. He is not worthy of any respect. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Who were you before? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Who were you before? The 500 yen coin is the most commonly used coin in Japan, and now it has fallen into the hands of Takashi Sekihara. He flicked a copper-colored coin and flipped it over, not knowing where he had hidden it. As a person with great professional ethics, he immediately improved his attitude after receiving the money and asked with a smile, Qin Jian, you haven't raised flowers much, have you? I haven't raised any flowers before, what's going on? Qin Liuli said, displeased. Qi Yuanwu, who had received the money, was very articulate and didn't care at all about her attitude. She patiently explained, if you have ever raised flowers, you should know that raising flowers requires very strict soil quality, and different flowers require different soil. Some flowers require soil with high humus content, some flowers require clay, some flowers require soil mixed with a large amount of sand and gravel to maintain permeability, some flowers only need stones and water, some flowers have extremely high requirements for soil acidity and alkalinity, and some flowers must regularly supplement with special mineral fertilizers. So, do you understand? Qin Liuli was dumbfounded and said inexplicably, I understand. What do I understand? Qi Yuanwu looked at her with a look of rotten wood cannot be carved and sighed, saying, that pile of soil, the pile of soil in the greenhouse, is not the potted soil to be replaced, it is the newly replaced waste soil, and there is no adhesive board. Qin Glaze recalled that pile of soil, and she also used a small shovel to rummage about for a while. It was really a pile of loose loess, black soil, red soil and gravel mixed soil, but what about that? She said strangely, isn't it normal to have replaced waste soil in the greenhouse? What's so strange? There's nothing inside, I personally dug it over. Qi Yuanwu looked at her with a fecal wall cannot be painted gaze and sighed, since there are various potted plants with such strict requirements for soil quality, the soil replacement time cannot be unified. Some should be replaced in early spring, some in late spring, some in autumn, and some even choose to replace soil at night or even on rainy days. In short, so many flowers with different habits and soil requirements should not be replaced at the same time. That is to say. Qin Liuli finally had a sudden realization and loudly said, don't say anything, I have come up with an inference. The mountain mulberry bookshelf is filled with potted gardening books, and there is also a very professional greenhouse with many rare and precious varieties. The professional level should be very high, and he is a true flower lover, so it is impossible to make such a low-level mistake. That pile of waste soil cannot be replaced by him. Someone has secretly touched potted plants. Someone did such a thing for no apparent reason, and coupled with Sang's recent disappearance at the foot of the mountain, the volume of the pile of waste soil is equivalent to that of a human body. Therefore, we can boldly infer that he has been killed and dismembered and hidden in a flower pot. After shouting for a while, she looked refreshed, as if she had eaten 7 ice creams in a row during the dog days, shivering and feeling comfortable from head to toe. It wasn't difficult to discover the truth. If I knew potted gardening, it would be me who solved the case. What a pity, it's just so close. Chiun-woo applauded with a smile and said, "You're right, Qin classmate is really smart." Humph. I am already very smart, the intellectual responsibility of Dongyu Town, but I have never raised any flowers. Qin Lioli is not completely foolish either. She can hear a sarcastic tone in Chiun-woo's words, but she is in a great mood now and has no intention of caring about his strange emotions, just thinking that he is really praising him. She asked excitedly, "How do you know it was done by 803? Even if Chi-Yuen-woo didn't find it directly, he should still be able to solve the case in the end. After all, the murder case is very serious, and the dismemberment is even more sensational. The police will probably dig the apartment building upside down, and in the end, they should be able to find a clue. Of course, this matter cannot be guaranteed, as there have been similar cases before. A woman was murdered by a neighbor, and some of her body was packed in a suitcase and thrown into a trash can in a nearby park. The police inquired about the woman's residence several times but couldn't find any clues. Some police officers even chatted with the perpetrator and revealed many investigative directions. However, in the end, due to the perpetrator's lack of intelligence, the body was not completely disposed of successfully. The residual body emitted a strange odor and was reported by the neighboring community, which ultimately led to the arrest. The Japanese police are known for their incompetence and are known as the salaried barrel group for a reason. It is also possible that this case cannot be solved in the end. So, Qin Lioli was also very curious about how Kaiwanwu could directly find the culprit. Her apricot eyes shone brightly, like a little kitten that had just smelled the fishy smell for the first time, almost bursting with desire. 500 yen was already a tearful sale, and Chiun-woo felt that she needed to renew her subscription. With a nonchalant attitude, she said, "Guess it, since I'm idle, I'll ask if I pass by." Qin Lioli looked at him expressionlessly for a moment, then vigorously pulled out a few 100 yen and 50 yen coins from Little Pig's wallet and gave them to him. Chiun-woo became enthusiastic again in an instant and smiled. "When we went to the rooftop, the cat's eyes of 803 dimmed for a moment." Cat's eyes dimmed for a moment. Qin Lioli was stunned and speechless. "Didn't you notice?" Chiun-woo said, "It's obvious that someone is lying inside and looking out." Qin Lioli is speechless. Only ghosts can notice this kind of thing. Who can walk and look at the cat's eye on someone's door? She couldn't believe it and said, "Is that all for? At least it's a bit suspicious. You're alone at home, with the door closed tightly. Why are you so sensitive to people passing by outside the door? You're very nervous. Has anyone been on the rooftop? When we discover Yamashita Yuki's body, it's hidden in the greenhouse. This behavior becomes even more suspicious, especially when we come back." The cat's eyes light up again. Did it light up again? Yes, he lay on the cat's eye and looked, but when he heard footsteps, he immediately withdrew his head and hid to the side. What do you think his psychological state is? Qin Lioli nodded hesitantly and said, "This is indeed quite suspicious." Chi-Yuen-woo smiled and said, "Actually, it's easier to think in a different direction." Qin Lioli immediately asked curiously, "What direction?" Chiun-woo glanced sideways at the wallet in her hand, hinting that it should be considered a new problem. Qin saw Lioli snorting coldly and began to pay, but after pulling it out twice, he strangely held the wallet in front of her and examined it closely. "Bastard, where's my money?" Chiun-woo thought kindly, "Actually, the previous explanation can already satisfy your curiosity. Another idea is unnecessary if you know it, so don't spend any more money. Qin Liuli glanced at him and pulled hard, leaving behind only a cartoon pig that seemed to have been on a diet and fitness for 3 months, and had successfully lost weight. He slapped a pile of coins at him and said with a black face, "I owe you 170 yen. I'll give it back to you tomorrow." The day after tomorrow is also possible. Chiyuan Wu was very eloquent and immediately said after putting away his money, "Think about it. Who is most likely to choose to hide you die in a greenhouse flower pot at the foot of the mountain?" Qin Liuli suddenly dared to transport corpses to the rooftop and was not worried about being bumped into in the stairs. Only the residents on the 8th floor dared to make such a choice, not even the 7th floor, let alone the 6th, 5th, and 4th floors. Combined with the nervous performance of 803 before, it was only natural for Chiyuan Wu to directly knock on his door. He grabbed his hand at the time and must have used some tricks such as psychometry and negating physiological reactions. In addition, the prisoner himself was on the verge of mental breakdown, so he immediately called in. "Actually, it's not difficult. If I had paid more attention to the cat's eye on the door, would have caught this criminal." It's really a pity. Qin Liuli was secretly regretful, feeling that there was still a slight difference between real combat and detective novels. She had no theory and lacked experience. She asked, "If 803 is not the murderer, how are you going to find clues again?" Chiyuan Wu didn't care at all and said, "What am I looking for? Let the police go find it. I'm just looking for people. Once I find them, I'll do it. Solving cases is the police's business, and they'll receive their salaries. Even if Yamashita Yuki doesn't find them, it's okay. Just don't take any money and go back. Our industry doesn't require repeated success. What we pursue is not to open for 3 years, but to open for 3 years. That's reasonable." Qin saw that Liuli was speechless, but then she rolled her eyes wide and said, "Who is in our business with you? I don't want to be a scammer. However, roast is attributed to roast." Seeing that colored glaze inevitably has a slight admiration for Chiyuan Wu, I think that although his personality is slightly flawed, he is really powerful. His observation is extremely powerful, not much different from the famous detective in the novel, even a little abnormal. She asked herself, her intelligence is absolutely excellent, and she has often been praised by her neighbors as a smart child since childhood. However, when she was with Chiyuan Wu, there was a faint feeling of being suppressed by intelligence, as if she had become a person who only knows why. There must be a problem in this. He can never be an ordinary high school student, his past experiences are definitely not simple. At this thought, her heart moved and she became curious about Kaiwan Wu's past experiences. Her eyes sparkled and she asked, "Why are you so fierce? No, who were you before and what did you do?" End of this chapter.